Welcome to Charts Today Europe. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Thursday, the 25th of October, comes to you from London. And what a day it was yesterday in the US. We saw the Nasdaq down 4.6%, the biggest fall for several years. It's 2011, the last time we saw that sort of scale of fall. So we are, of course, just seeing that spreading across the world at the moment. And so if we look at the dollar actually jumped yesterday, holding its strength, upside potential of nearly 2% on that short-term chart. Euro looking weaker against the dollar with the downside target of 2% there. So it is dollar strength is dominating. Against the yen, the dollar is actually falling away a little bit, the yen being a safe haven in times of uncertainty. So we're seeing the yen just showing some strength. Sterling actually weaker against the dollar, sitting at 129, and we've got targets to 126, 128 against the euro. Sterling jumping a little bit, and against the Swiss franc and the Aussie dollar, sterling is actually up a little bit this morning, but still bearish in the short term. Bitcoin down a little bit this morning, really just not doing very much in either direction at the moment. The S&P 500 index was down 3% yesterday. That's a massive fall for the top 500 stocks in the US. We've got a downside target of 8% and 9% on the medium term. That's on the short term chart. So we are seeing downside potential there. Remembering this is our weekly 1%, daily 0.5%, and 60-minute and 0.1%. So it's giving me a long-term, medium-term, and short-term view. Looking at the Nasdaq, we see here down 4.6%, massive fall. What we were worried about was the lower low. We're seeing that now. We recovered off the low set earlier in the month, and now we're actually below that level. So the lower low in Dow terms is not great. We're still holding the long-term trend, but medium term we're now bearish, short term very bearish, and we're seeing 12% downside on the long-term chart, 6% downside on the short-term chart. The Dow also pushing lower, breaking its medium-term trend now as well. Downside target there of 10% on the Dow. And the Russell 2000, the index that's been worrying us the most in the US, is actually just falling very heavily, down nearly 4% yesterday. This is the top 2,000 stocks in the US. And we've got downside targets of 15 and 16% there. Looking at the futures today for the US, up slightly on the S&P future. That was looking stronger, but that is already evaporating this morning. And looking at the Nasdaq E-mini again, this was up 2/3%, just under an hour ago, and now we're seeing that falling as well. So looks like the US will open just higher, but that is fading. We're seeing the FTSE future this morning down 1%, 1.8%, 0.8, and the DAX down 0.75%. The cash market's now open. The FTSE down 0.8%, so sinking lower, making new multi-month lows. This low that was set in March is now coming under pressure. If we break that, we're back to levels that we saw at the start of 2017. So looking pretty bearish there. And in fact, the FTSE 250, the mid caps in the UK, is already making 18-month lows, so that's looking pretty bearish, and has done actually look bearish since August. So we've been worried about this this breadth in the market, if you like. No clear downside target, so hard to call the bottom on the mid caps. But looking back to the FTSE, we do have downside targets, some 3% lower on the short-term chart. We do still have up targets in train, and we have a support level here, but it's looking pretty bearish. And given those US indices, pretty hard to escape the fact that we've got downside targets there as well. The DAX in Germany, multiple downside targets on the short-term chart, looking lower there. The CAC Quarante actually down only 0.5%. The DAX down 1.5%. The CAC Quarante only down 0.5%. Faring better. This is the best of a bad bunch in Europe. So it's surviving better than the UK or Germany. Japan down 3%. The Hang Seng down 1.8%. China just managing to nudge up towards the close. So that's looking uncharacteristically bucking the trend there. And the Indian market down over 1%. The Australian market down 2.8%. Brent crude is actually just sitting at about $75. We've got a downside target here. If we go lower than that, that's a further 4% fall. This just reflecting the sentiment really globally. WTI also lower. That's West Texas Intermediate crude. Gold actually starting to make a long-term transition. Whilst stock markets are transitioning to bearish, gold is transitioning to bullish. 3 upside targets on the short-term chart, looking pretty good there, and silver also bullish on the short term. US 10-year yields, which have really struggled with this with these markets and has been rising, now starting to fall back to 3.1%. So markets pricing in that the Fed may not actually raise rates as quickly with this sell-off. So it'll be interesting to see. Bond prices in Europe looking short-term bullish, but of course medium and long-term still bearish. Taking a look at that data all coming from Metastock Zenith or Thomson Reuters Icon. This screen here coming from Yahoo Finance, and here we see all the FTSE prices coming in live. We'll take a quick look at the world indices. Just a sea of red here. We see all the Asian indices down. The Euro Stoxx down 0.8%, 0.87%. Most markets down around 1%. So we're seeing that this morning kicking in from the Yahoo Finance data. Taking a look at the Nasdaq just quickly, last night we saw big falls here. Google down 5%, Amazon down nearly 6%, breaking its medium-term trend. Remembering that tech has really been a driver for the market. We're seeing here, this is relative to the Dow Jones Index, we're seeing here actually Apple holding up pretty well. So it's the big stocks that have been holding the market up. We've seen that from the Russell 2000 Index falling away more heavily. And here we are seeing the end of relative trends. So quite interestingly, things are turning more and more bearish. Looking at Facebook, for example, below the 150 mark, down 5.4%, just starting to enter long-term bearish trends. Down with downside targets of 25%, 27% for Facebook. So the stars of what the stars of the tech giants are starting to crack, and we're seeing here Microsoft down 5%. Has been a really good performer, but now starting to give up that. Really performing in line with the market, but if we break lower there on Microsoft, that's also starting to be a factor. Netflix down 9%, Nvidia, which has been a star performer, down 9% overnight. Really big falls here. Tesla actually bucking the trend, down just 2%, and should be up today after announcing strong profits for the quarter. They're up nearly 10% in after-hours trading. Taking a look at the FTSE this morning, we've got here just ranking the columns. Not everything is falling. We've got National Grid up 1.2%. Randgold Resources, of course, higher 1% on gold price, helping there. Utilities doing pretty well, seen as a safe place. United Utilities 7 Trent only up sort of 0.5%, but in a market that's down over 1%, we are just seeing a little bit of a flight to utilities. Looking at the other side, we've got some pretty big falls here. WPP down 16, 18% this morning, so really falling away pretty heavily there. So we're seeing pharmaceuticals down as well. AstraZeneca, Shire, all heading quite a lot lower. Glaxo down 2%. Global companies with global markets really being hit quite badly there. Taking a look at the FTSE 250, we're looking at the percentage change here. Again, not all down. We've got Contour Global up 3%, so we are seeing some stocks higher. But looking at the downside, of course, there's a plethora of stocks with downside targets. We're seeing Worldwide Healthcare down 5%, Hastings Group down 5%. Lots of stocks sinking lower with downside targets. So it's worth looking at your own stocks here just to check what the downside potential is. Taking a look at the Euro Stoxx, this is the 600 stocks in Europe. We see ICA Group up 10%, not all falling. We've got another one, Kion, up 10%. Where there are strong performances, there they will show through. But realistically, these trends all still looking pretty bearish. And taking a look at WPP, that's the worst performer in the 600, and there are others down 8%, 10%. So we are seeing some pretty big falls across the market there. So it's just a very difficult time, and we need to be watching for any signs of a recovery, but no signs yet. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.